Today we are here to talk about Pep Guardiola's Manchester City side, fresh off the back of a pretty disappointing and drab 0-0 draw against Arsenal. Everyone seems to be talking about Manchester City's performances in the Premier League this season. Have they been good enough? Are they still the title contenders to match? And straight off the back of that 0-0 draw against Arsenal, Ben, quite a lot of suggestions. I mean, I do want to come to you first here because, you cover Arsenal extensively and you wrote a really good article on Man City in particular, but let's talk about Arsenal briefly before we spend the rest of this video talking about Man City. It wasn't a great game for the neutral, but from a defensive point of view, it felt like Arsenal did just about everything right.
Yeah, like you say, in terms of chances created, if you're a neutral watching it, it wasn't entertaining. But in terms of tactically, I think we were just seeing two teams at such a high level, basically cancelling each other out. And I think the job Arsenal did on Man City was a remarkable one because, Arsenal aren't going to go there to the team that have probably been the best team for the last 5 years in the world. They're not going to go there and play expansive attacking football because you're going to get beaten 4-1 like they did last season. But I thought Saliba and Gabriel did a real job on Haaland, and I thought the way that we pressed and when we got the ball, Arsenal got the ball back, they had the composure to keep it and create chances. I thought it was an amazing defensive performance, and it sort of really highlighted for me how much Arsenal missed Saliba last season because Rob Holding played in that game, in that fixture last season, which I think kind of makes you realise why Arsenal lost that game 4-1 when you replace Saliba with him. But an amazing game, and I think Man City did miss Kyle Walker and John Stones. I think they had to also reshuffle that back four when Nathan Ake went off, which I think really helped Arsenal and stopped City being able to play as high up the pitch as they would have liked, perhaps. But I think a really solid defensive performance for Arsenal. And I think it's a great point for Arsenal. And I think for Man City, they've got a real job to do now to try and retain the title.
Yeah, and there's definitely is a kind of growing belief that Man City just aren't really kind of doing enough in these big games as they have done in previous seasons. You did a really great article on this on Tuesday on Transfermarkt on the homepage where people can go read. But why don't you kind of just summarise what you found from kind of digging into the stats this week?
Yeah, well, they've not won a game against top five this season. They've only got one fixture remaining against Tottenham, which is a pretty startling record for Manchester City. But we kind of looked at it, or I certainly looked at it, more about their Big Six record against the traditional Big Six clubs since Pep Guardiola came in. And it's quite interesting. So City's record this season is they picked up 1.33 points per game from their 9 games against their fellow Big Six rivals. But if you compare that to across Guardiola's tenure, it doesn't look too good. So if you look at the 5 seasons that the Manchester City have won the title under Guardiola, they've averaged 2.14 points per game against the Big Six. So it's a huge drop off to where they're at this season. And the 2 seasons they didn't win the title under Guardiola, they averaged 1.3 points per game in 2019-20, and then 1 point per game in 2016-17. So if you look at it from that way, that certainly where City are at the moment, the record in the big games wouldn't be good enough to win the title. However, I would caveat that by saying that they've got a really good run. If you look at their fixtures compared to Liverpool and Arsenal, I think City had the easiest games out of all of them, and I'd expect them to pick up a lot of points. I've seen some people saying they could go unbeaten in that run. You wouldn't be surprised. City always tend to kick into gear when it comes to the business end of the season. They obviously have Champions League commitments. Pep Guardiola's come out and moaned about schedule already. They face a lot of games in a short space of time. So I certainly wouldn't be ruling City out. If you had a gun to my head at the moment, I would say that City, despite being third place in the league, are still the favourites.
Yeah, it's interesting because all 3 of those teams are still in European football. You'd expect all 3 to go quite far. Obviously, Manchester City and Arsenal in the Champions League. Liverpool, obviously, in the Europa League are probably favourites alongside Bayer Leverkusen, I would say, to go kind of all the way, at least to the final. So all 3 clubs juggling a lot of kind of competitions there. But Ben, if we do kind of almost go back to almost, obviously Ewan kind of laid out the stats there, but if you almost just look at a kind of tactical point of view here, watching that game on Sunday, the thing that really stood out to me was just how ineffective Erling Haaland was as a striker. And I do kind of wonder if you kind of compare Man City when Pep Guardiola first arrived at the club or when they first started really playing like a Guardiola team to where they are now. The obvious issue, or the obvious difference to me is, well, the fact he's now playing 4 central defenders makes a big difference as well. I think, as you said, Akanji at right back probably kind of blunted Man City's attack, but the fact that they're now almost so reliant on a penalty box striker, where in the past, and not just at Man City but other clubs as well, Guardiola has almost favoured a kind of strikerless formation or a false number 9, or even someone like Sergio Aguero, who could also do things outside the box as well. I was really just quite struck by at times Man City were almost playing like they had a man down, because unless they were getting the service into the box for Haaland, it felt like a disadvantage.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I wouldn't go as far as Roy Keane and say League Two, but I think there's really something in it, because I personally think Man City were a more free-flowing team before Erling Haaland came in that season. They won the title just without a striker, basically. Obviously, last season, no one's going to criticise it. Haaland came in, he scored 36 Premier League goals, Man City won the treble. But for me, Pep Guardiola has sacrificed some of the build-up play and some of the fluidity in Man City's attack to get in a potent number 9. And obviously that sacrifice pays off if Haaland's getting the goals he has done last season and almost has done this season. But when he's not getting them, you do lose so much, because he doesn't get involved in the game. He is literally there for the final movement in the box. And if he scores that goal from the corner where it comes across and he scores it, no one talks about it. Everyone's saying Haaland is the man again. That's what he's there for. But as soon as he doesn't get prolific numbers, Man City are losing something in the way they play. So he's really, for him to justify being in that team, he has to carry on scoring at the rate he has so far, because he has so few touches as well in big games. And for a team that dominates possession, it is quite baffling that a player can only touch the ball sort of 13 times for a team that, I think Man City had 74% possession against Arsenal, who are a title challenger. But he is still Erling Haaland, and you would not be surprised if he goes and gets 15 goals in the remaining 8 games of the season for Premier League, which would again justify why Pep brought him to Manchester.
Yeah, it's so interesting with Haaland, because I remember watching him come through at Dortmund, and the thing that really made most of the headlines was his speed. If you watch like highlights of his goals for Dortmund, more often than not, it's kind of balls over the top, which he runs onto. He's outpacing defenders who are got 10 feet on him or something. He's making those kind of back post finishes after a counter attack from Dortmund. That's kind of how he's made his name in Austria and Germany. But then you come to England, and he's basically had to reinvent his entire game, because Manchester City simply do not get that many counter attacks, because teams simply don't sit on the halfway line when they're playing Man City. Even Arsenal, as we saw on Sunday, who arguably at least the second best team in the league, you would imagine, this season. So I mean, I'm going to actually kind of put you on the spot here, because I remember you did actually run the numbers on Haaland's record in these top 6 games. I don't know if you have it to hand. If you don't, that's absolutely fine. But what do you think about this kind of suggestion that, yes, Haaland scores a buckload of goals every season, but in these kind of crunch games and against the top 6, he can sometimes be a bit of a disadvantage rather than a huge advantage?
Yeah, you touched on it there. If a team deploys a low block like Arsenal did the weekend when they parked the bus, and it's difficult for Haaland to attack the space in behind. That's what he's best at. I mean, his numbers in the big games are still pretty good. For a normal striker, his numbers are fine. It's just the fact that we view Haaland as this sort of like outlier, this incredible specimen that scores at a ridiculous rate. He scored more than a goal a game against Manchester United, so that's probably one of City's biggest games. And his record against other top teams is good. It's fine for a normal striker. It's because Haaland gets judged to such high standards. And I mean, I don't agree with Roy Keane's point either about being a League Two player in general build-up, but it's obviously not the strongest part of his game. But I think I'd just be wary of being too critical of Haaland or being too critical of Man City, because we could be sitting here in 2 months' time and they won the treble again. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that they'll do that, and then Guardiola could win his 4th title in a row, which would be the first time in Premier League history. So yeah, I'm always wary of writing City off, because they're such a machine when it comes to the closing weeks of the season.
Yeah, well, that maybe seems like a good way to kind of cap off this discussion. You guys can obviously let us know in the comments below. Do you think Man City have dropped off this season? Do you think the record against the Big 6 will cost them in the title race? And of course, how do you think Erling Haaland has performed in these games? Is he an advantage or a disadvantage to Guardiola's tactics? Let us know in the comments. Like and subscribe to the video if you've enjoyed this content. And until next time, we'll speak to you soon.